All right. Well, hello, everyone. Um, my name is Crystal Cedino, and I am the Training Development Manager for the Native Learning Center, doing the technical behind-the-scenes assistance that you might need. And with me today, too, there's Cora. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Cora.
Hello, everybody. I'm Cora Anthony. I'm the Training and Development Specialist at the Native Learning Center.
So we're thrilled that all of you could be here today. So thank you for giving us the time to, be part of this and have input and so on and so forth. Before we get started, let's go ahead and just kind of like cover the basics, some housekeeping on this platform for those of us that aren't so familiar with it. So with that, there should be arrows, right? Yeah, go ahead and click next, Eugene.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, so you have a raise hand tool right there where that red arrow just popped up. So that's a great tool to go ahead and get us, acquainted or attention if you need it. Then the next arrow that popped up will be the reactions that we have available. So you can do thumbs up, hand claps, and so on and so forth. Then you have the option to mute and unmute yourself, which is that third arrow that popped up. Pretty easy, just click it, make sure you select your correct audio preferences and microphone preferences. And then from there is up top where you can zoom in and you can change the layout of your screen. And just really quick, oh wait, go back one more, sorry. And then you also have video options, sharing options. Record is more on our end, but you are able to share something if you have anything to share. We really do encourage turning on your video capabilities if you have them, as well as your microphone. So please, 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 participate. These trainings are really nothing without participants and participation. So, interact. That's, Eugene mentioned it earlier, where this is truly an opportunity to just have a full-on conversation about the topic. So with that, I'm done jibber jabbering. If no one else has any questions or anything like that, I'm going to go ahead and just pass it off to Eugene.
Thank you very much. First of all, like to thank the Native Learning Center for giving us an opportunity to try and do something. And I want to apologize for the people in the room that I don't know why these things happen sometimes, but this has been a jinx program that we've had trouble marketing, we've had trouble registering people. These things happen sometime, but this isn't a one-shot deal. It's more like when I started working with Tribal Tab a few years ago, the people who, and what is Tribal Tab? It's technical assistance for brownfields, and we work mostly with the tribal response programs that each tribe can set up, and many tribes have set them up. And Scott's going to tell us about what tribal response programs are. But one of the first things I heard, and they knew that I had spent 30 years at HUD, and they said, oh, every once in a while we help the housing authorities, but more often than not, the tribal housing authorities and the tribal response programs don't talk to each other. And that's been on our radar. What can we do to enhance dialogue, discussion, cooperation? So this is an attempt to move in that direction, but we're certainly open to anything that makes sense. So let me just start by saying a little bit about what tribal housing authorities are. Like in our country, the way that HUD, the federal government, delivers housing programs to everyone is HUD doesn't do it directly. They create, or the local, if the local people want to get HUD money for, let's say, housing, they create a housing authority. And this is whether you're a tribe or not. there's all these local housing authorities, and it's the same thing for tribes. That if you want to get the Indian Housing Block Grant, if you want to run any of these, get any of this HUD money, you have to create a tribally designated housing entity. Most of them are tribal housing authorities, and it's the interface of HUD with the tribes. So there's two main things that a tribal housing authority would do. It either develops new housing, and one of our speakers from the Ponca Housing Authority is going to explain how they've done that and they've worked with the tribal response program. Or it could even be just helping homeowners finance their the housing that they're buying, not building it, but just helping purchase it. And that could be done through the housing authority. And if they are developing or rehabbing housing stock, they will have to do an environmental review prior to site acquisition. And it includes a bunch of things like floodplains, wetlands, historic preservation, also includes site contamination. And there's nobody locally who knows more about site contamination and how to assess it and what to do about it than your tribal response program, if you have one of those. And Scott's going to explain all the resources that go into training and maintaining that high level of knowledge and competency. But it's not only that. Like once you have the housing, if you're a tribal housing authority, you have to maintain your inventory. You have to make sure that it's a decent place to live all the time. That it one way HUD says is it has to meet housing quality standards. But it could be every once in a while we do some maintenance and we may have to do an environmental review. It could also be that maybe there was a spill, maybe there was some site contamination, and we have an example of that we'll discuss, and that would be an opportunity for the tribal response program and the tribal housing authority to work together. But each tribal housing authority, they decide what HUD programs they want to implement, and they operate this pretty independently. There are certain rules that they have to follow in structure, and HUD provides training, but it's really run by the local people, your local tribal housing authority. Okay, now Scott's going to tell us a little bit about the tribal response programs.
All right, thank you, Eugene. Eugene mentioned I'm with the Kansas State University Tribal TAB program. It's the Technical Assistance to Brownfields. Go ahead, next slide if you want, Eugene. And we assist tribes nationwide. Recognized, we help them out with the Brownfields program. And there's certain things that a TRP program is supposed to do. There's kind of 4 elements that the program is focused on. There is a survey and keeping track of your brownfield sites and inventory. There's oversight and enforcement. And also have opportunities for public participation. And then also it deals with the assessment and cleanup. Ensure the site's cleaned up for future use. As we go through some of this, for those of you that are on the TRP side, you've heard many of these things before. For those of you that do mostly tribal housing, some of this might be a little new. But as we go through these slides, I kind of want you to consider how, even as I'm sharing information, think about how the TRP stuff we're seeing can apply to housing and how that might work together. Because as Eugene mentioned, that's kind of what we're here for today. Next slide, please. Again, this talk is mainly to try to stimulate some cooperation between the housing program and the Brownfields program within tribes. There is a renewed push at the federal government level between EPA and HUD to try to get this going on with things working together, coordinated assessments, things that work on their level, but it won't work unless in an individual community, both programs are also talking to each other. Next slide, please. All right, EPA provides funds to tribes to deal with brownfields many ways. Two of the main are the 128 and 104K sources. That's under CERCLA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. And under these two programs, tribes can get some money to address problems at brownfield sites.
Scott, do you mind if I do a little color commentary while you're going through this?
I don't mind at all. And not only that, you know, we have a small group today. So
Yeah.
as we go through these, anybody that wants to stop, ask questions, throw a hand up or unmute, whatever you need to do, because we're small enough, this can definitely be discussion oriented even during the slide part. Please go ahead, Eugene.
Yeah, and I mentioned we want to know where we should be walking with this. And the thing I wanted to point out, like we're talking about, here's where we get funding. The early slide talked about state and tribal. So like every state has a response program, and every state has a voluntary cleanup program. And if your tribe doesn't have a tribal response program, then you go to the state. But a lot of tribes don't want to go to the state. And that's why EPA opened it up and say, fine, you know, you're a sovereign nation. You have the authority to run your own program. It's just we'll want to train you, and we'll want to make sure that you're meeting the standards that everyone else is meeting.
One thing I'd like to point out with that cooperation with the state, in Kansas, the tribes here actually use the state environment department. They will use their environmental contractors. And that way the bidding out process, everything's a lot smoother because the contractors are already in place and the tribes have access to that. And so they get better rates, and the process is just a lot smoother sometimes than having to do it themselves. There's lots of different levels of cooperation between the tribes and states. Even if everybody does have a program, there's still ways to make that work.
Yeah, and I think things today are a lot better than they have been in the past. At least from my perspective, it's like every federal bureaucrat is being told, treat the tribes right. And, you know, make sure you don't forget about the tribes, and make sure you provide adequate service.
All right, for those of you unfamiliar, a brownfield, I'm going to read the definition to you here. It's real property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. Now, as related to housing, you know, that's that future use that might not be happening because it's a contaminated site. You know, perhaps the tribal housing program is looking for buildings they could use for housing, and they're just writing off something because it might be contaminated. Well, the TRP program can work with the housing and, you know, get that addressed, assess the problem, clean up the problem, and turn it into a viable property for housing use. Next slide, please. As Eugene mentioned, the TRP responds to releases of hazardous substances, pollutants, contaminants, and that was written on purpose to be very vague. You know, it doesn't have to be hazardous waste. It can be all kinds of things, asbestos, petroleum, even mine-scarred lands for communities that are in mining country. What that allows for is the TRP can address a multitude of problems. All right, now, going to look at some pictures of some sites here. And again, you know, consider how some of this might be related to the housing world. The one on the left, big old building, asbestos. It's sitting there vacant. you know, structurally, that place is fine. The plumbing is good. The electricity goes in there. Everything is usable. Could be turned into some residential apartment type structure, but nobody wanted to mess with it because there was asbestos, lead-based paint. So it sits vacant. It's kind of a waste. Next to it there, you've just got a typical little illegal dump. You know, these are found everywhere. And sometimes they just sit. Nobody knows how to address it. Contaminants, you know, vary, as I mentioned. It can be, you know, metals. It can be something in drums that's unknown. And again, it doesn't even need to be known contamination to qualify as a brownfield. It can be an unknown. And that way, there's funding available to do the testing and see if there's a real problem. Next, please, Eugene. All right, as I mentioned, asbestos, lead paint, very common in older buildings that, you know, maybe you want to reuse the old building for new housing. Maybe you just want to clear the property that the old building's on. Either way, you got to deal with the asbestos, lead-based paint. You know, releases of petroleum and other contaminants. You know, I'm not saying you want to put a house back right on a service station site, but sometimes that petroleum migrates. You know, it might be affecting a few properties in the area. And working through the Brownfields program, you can see the extent of that and help make decisions on housing locations.
And if you ever turn it into a tank problem, Scott in a former life was a tank person. So he's a great person to get advice from.
Basically, they all leak eventually is the key. One of the other things, you know, clandestine drug labs. There is actually, we are working with a community right now. They have 3 houses that they need for their community, but they're suspected of being meth labs, and so they can't put any people in there. So, you know, they're getting an assessment actually through EPA to test the houses, and then if there's cleanup necessarily, they'll get them taken care of and back on the housing roster for the tribe.
Yeah, so meth is something that can be addressed. It's just you gotta know that it's there and you gotta do it correctly, right? Okay.
And I mentioned mine-scarred lands. This is limited to certain parts of the country, but it definitely is applicable in those areas. You know, the tailings piles, all the stuff that is left behind, it's not hospitable for housing usually, but it is possible to get those areas restored, make them useful again.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
For the brownfields to be able to pay for contaminated methamphetamine homes, does it have to be considered a lab, or as long as you got positive testing, can they cover the cost?
It's a good question. And I would think they probably could do it. However, the cleanup money that is available from EPA, and we're going to get into some of the funding sources later, the cleanup money is somewhat competitive to get to. Assessments are fairly easy to access. Cleanup funds are competitive and usually reserved for bigger projects. Now, I do know that some gap funding has been used for meth cleanup, and any tribal solid waste money, you know, because often it depends on what the tests show, but often it's not even a hazardous waste problem. It's just a solid waste. It just needs to be removed.
Yeah, and gap funding is EPA funding to tribes.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I probably should have mentioned that. It's a more of a general fund that's out there. You know, there are certain programs with tailored money. The gap funding, it's more general and can be kind of spread out over many things.
Okay.
But I guess the bottom line here is you don't see any of those funds unless you ask for them. And, you know, sometimes what'll work in one state will have to be done differently in another state. with another tribe. But what you want to do, my 2 cents, and Scott, correct me, is you want to start asking. You want to start asking TAB. You want to start asking HUD. I have this problem. Where could I get the funds? And then people will try and help you.
And so again, this slide just points out, the goal is in the brownfields program is to take care of an old site that's not being used, that might have environmental problems, and get it ready for reuse, whether that's housing or something else. Next slide, please. An example, old building that ended up getting taken out. It had some issues, some contaminants, and got replaced. I am told, and Eugene, jump in on this, I am told HUD funding is not only for just houses, but also, other building types, other things that are beneficial to the community. Is that correct? It doesn't necessarily have.
That's definitely correct. It's U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. There's a public housing part of HUD, and then there's a community planning and development. For tribes, it's sort of scrunched together in ONAP, Office of Native American Programs, but there definitely is that community development aspect to it. And that's why it makes sense to work together. Like the Brownfield program really is an urban community development program. It's trying to, and it's something where EPA got involved because people were complaining to EPA that there's a problem, and EPA started doing stuff even though HUD was involved. What I found in my experience is that HUD has a lot more money than EPA to do stuff, but EPA provides a lot more technical assistance than HUD. When how do I clean up this site? Where do I get funding from other agencies? Could you send somebody out who's a technical expert to help me with this?
Next slide, please. All right. As we've indicated, the goal, we're trying to encourage information sharing and working together. Eugene mentioned the ONAP program there with HUD. A couple months ago, I presented with an ONAP representative to the EPA Region 5 tribes up in the Great Lakes area. And, we were talking about this coordination of stuff. And one of the tribal TRP folks said, well, that would require the housing people talk to me, and they don't want to do that. Everybody's got their little areas, and sometimes people are protective of their funds, or it's just not convenient to work with another group. But there are a lot of benefits if you can get across those lines. And, that's what we're shooting for here. All right, we've talked a little about CERCLA and brownfields laws. That's the definition again, and one of the keys is this is the combination of contamination or potential contamination with redevelopment and reuse. Brownfields program is not there just to clean up sites if they're not going to be used and redeveloped. The program exists to help tribes, states, other communities, with cleaning up things that need to be back in productive use. And so that's the emphasis of the program.
Yeah, and the program provides a lot of technical assistance. It does provide some grants, but what we found outside of Indian country is that the only way these properties get turned around is if you get lots of other stakeholders involved. And maybe Scott will talk about that more, but I think Indian country has been slow with that. In Indian country, you're sort of expecting, oh, I'll get one grant that'll cover everything. But it's more like, how many friends can we get to like an Amish country where they get the whole community and they build a barn. That's sort of what you got to do with brownfields. You got to get the whole community together to get rid of that slum and blighted property.
And when I say that it kind of is linked to redevelopment, that doesn't mean that, nobody expects that, you clean up an old contaminated area and the very next year there's 20 houses that are there and being used. Sometimes it's slow progress. The idea is that the property will get reused, and sometimes that even involves interim use. While you're gathering funds for the next step, maybe you have some community gardens, maybe you have just other things needed that are temporary, but it still all shows the progress of being developed, of being reused, and that makes it a brownfield site that is eligible for funding. So, next slide. All right, this is more about the actual parts of CERCLA, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on these slides, but it will be there in the recording if you really want to look it up. Kind of the important things to think about is as we go to the next one, please, Eugene. We get back to the 4 elements for tribes that have a TRP, and I want you to think about how these can apply to your housing. One of the requirements for the TRP is that they have an inventory of the brownfield sites. We actually have a community in Oklahoma. They're keeping an inventory of not just their brownfield sites, which might be contaminated. They're keeping that right with their inventory of all their realty properties. All of their properties, brownfields or not, they're keeping that together. They've got their housing, they've got their community-owned business, everything. They want to keep track of that together. So there's some overlap even in, your property inventory. Next slide, please. One of the things that we mentioned was the requirement for TRPs to have a lot of public participation. And I'm not sure in the tribal housing world how it works, but Brownfields program is really big on having the community be behind whatever the redevelopment is. And we've seen that if the community is informed from the beginning of one of these projects, you get a little more momentum towards supporting whatever the end use is that the community wants. And that could be housing or something else. But, the earlier the community gets involved, the more the final project might be successful.
Yeah, and put all this in context. Like we said, it could be housing, it could be some other building. But when you're citing a new building or fixing up an old one, are you going to look on the fringe where there's a green field, or are you going to look where people are already living, where it's the neighborhood, and maybe there's a blighted property that nothing's going on there and it's pulling down the rest of the community? You could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And that's what brownfield redevelopment is all about. It's like when we do something new, let's help the community that exists. Let's not just build on the outskirts where there's going to be a new community and leave the old community behind.
Eugene, could you go back 1, please? I want to point something out on element 4.
Keep on going.
Back the other way.
Oh, okay. Oh, 4. You mean this one here?
One more back.
Oh, okay.
On the 4th element, whoop. Thank you. One of the things I did want to point out, the tribal response program, one of their duties is to document that a site has been cleaned up. The cleanup is verified, it's documented, and it goes on public record. You go ahead to the next slide now. But what that does is it's there, and in the future, if maybe you don't want to put housing there right now, but 10 years from now, somebody's going, oh, we don't want to do that. That was the old dry cleaner. Well, there will be a record there for all the tribal members to see. Hey, it was a dry cleaner. They tested it. They cleaned it up. It's perfectly safe. You know, comfortable now going in and having housing there. And you know, the requirement to have that, it seems like overkill, but you know, things happen slowly sometimes, and people forget what was done, and they might be uncomfortable using, you know, an old contaminated site. With the public record and the requirements to have things certified as closed, you know, that alleviates some of those problems. Next slide, please. Again, you know, we kind of covered all this. The idea of the TRP funding from EPA is to, you know, get the tribes so they can assess and clean up these sites and be ready for reuse. Next slide, please. In addition to the Tribal Response Program, EPA also offers a competitive grant program, and that's through the 104K law. And it's an annual program. They give money for assessments and cleanups. As I mentioned to Alex, this is very competitive. I think about a third of the applicants every year get funded. It's really hard to get that money. If you find another way, that's better. One good thing about it is for the assessments, they're starting to realize that not every community has the capacity to do a full grant for assessments, and they're allowing what they're calling coalition assessments, where you know, maybe one community is a little stronger in environmental grants can be the lead, and then some other, you know, can jump in. And that doesn't have to necessarily run along the lines of tribal and non-tribal communities. Last year in Montana, there was a coalition assessment grant that was issued, and the lead was a town there, and then one of their partners was a tribe. And so everybody's going to benefit for that assessment money together. That's
a
kind
great
of
model.
approach. There's some more there on the grants. Please go ahead.
All right.
We've talked about the impacts. All right, have an example for you of a site that was a brownfield and housing combination, and this is in Poplar, Montana. It was the Fort Peck had the lead on this, and there was an old airport, and it had many of the contaminants you find at an old airport. There was fuel issues, there was pesticide from crop dusting, just lots of little things. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And that was what was there. You know, once an airport gets abandoned, it kind of just accumulates stuff. Not all of it too pleasant. You know, you have fuel tanks, you've got drums. Next slide, please. And that is now housing. After some work in combination between the Brownfields assessment, and they did get some cleanup funds, and then the housing department stepped in and you know, used that, and now it's being used as housing. All right, again, we're just trying to point out how the housing and the Brownfields programs can work together, you know, and you know, perhaps by stacking the resources, some projects can get done a little more efficiently.
All right, so we've foreshadowed this, but what we're saying is that there's a tribal housing authority or designated housing entity. There may or may not be a tribal response program. And often, Scott mentioned, that people don't talk to each other. They, and who knows why? And there are a million reasons why. Some people say, oh, they're protecting their own turf. They're afraid they'll lose their job. They're afraid that somebody will raid their resources. But most people realize that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. That if you could work with somebody together, that you're going to accomplish more than you could do separately. And we're trying to before we, or, you know, people could talk the whole time, but we wanted to present two examples. And one example is the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska with the Northern Ponca Housing Authority. And I'd like to ask our friends from the tribe and the Housing Authority now to tell us a little bit about your experience of working together.
Hi, I'm Misha Mazurkowitz. I am the current environmental manager for the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska. And at this time, I was the TRP.
Okay.
And I believe Alex and Nicole are also on. So they can
Yep,
jump
I'm
in
here.
whenever they want.
All right, why don't you introduce yourselves?
I am Nicole Beauvais. I work in the maintenance department at the Northern Ponca Housing Authority.
And I think
Alex.
Alex, we've already heard from, but introduce yourself anyway.
I'm the maintenance coordinator for the Northern Ponca Housing.
Okay, so maybe like we have a slide here on the different programs. Tell us a little bit about Nicole and Alex about the programs that you run with the Housing Authority.
Our low-income housing programs, you know, I believe every housing has those. So we run those down payment assistance. We budget so many a year where we assist new homeowners to become new buyers to become homeowners. We have a tenant homeownership program. The tenants can buy our houses they live in. Obviously, they gotta be mortgage ready and all those type of things. The housing authority has a program that they walk them through, you know, become debt free, things like that, so they can be mortgage ready. We have a homeowners assistance program, improvement program. They get up to $12,000, and we do about 6 of those a year. They put their application, we inspect the homes, and rehab their homes up to the $12,000 limit. And then we have our RUSH program, and they assist tenants to become self-sufficient. That's the programs that we run here at Northern Ponca Housing.
All right, and I want to add something. If I'm remembering correctly, that your housing authority doesn't just serve members of the Ponca tribe, but you serve any Native American. Is that correct?
Yes, we serve all natives, and for certain programs, you know, we got Ponca preference, but we do serve everyone.
Okay, and then Misha, tell us a little bit about what you do with the Tribal Response Program.
Well, if you want to go ahead and click this more, we
Okay.
have 3 different programs within our environmental department. We have the Clean Air Act 103, and then we have Circular 128A, and then we have GAP. The Circular 128A, what we mainly did with that was windshield surveys, which are kind of like a mock phase 1. We can help pay for phase 1 and phase 2 be completed. And then on this project, we did asbestos removal.
All right, so tell us about the joys and stresses.
So I guess some of the joys were we completed a mock phase 1 windshield survey in the houses, and then alerted to possible asbestos and lead before they were going to demolish the houses. So that was just an extra concern that we had when they were going to demolish those. And then we paid for phase 1 and phase 2, and then helped fund an abatement, and then had a cleanup of the asbestos of both houses. It was about $30,000.
Hey, tell us a little bit about what a mock phase 1 is.
It's almost exactly like a phase 1, except for I am not like certified, so I can't put my certification stamp on it. I know there's not necessarily a certification, but I'm not an environmental specialist per se because I'm short a year of experience.
Yeah. And let me point out that there's a continuum that the HUD regulations, even though, first of all, if you just have an individual single family home, nobody's asking you for a phase one. They're asking for you sort of like a transaction screen on that 1 to 4 family structure. But even if it's more than that, even if it's commercial real estate where they're strongly saying that, you know, we want, I'm not going to quote the regulations, but it says, it doesn't say ASTM protocols, but it says currently used by professionals. And, you know, it might be possible to work with your tribal response program to do the equivalent of a phase one. And we have one of the co-directors of the tribal tab program, Mickey Hartnett, he's put a lot of work into that. But if it looks like, and a lot of phase ones are routine where they don't find anything. So, you know, will a private contractor do a better job than your local TRP? I personally don't think so, because there's a lot of value in having somebody local who's been there or who knows people who've been there, lives there, knows what's going on. On the other hand, if you find that there really was a serious heavy duty industrial use and there's evidence of contamination, you're going to do a phase two, then your tribal response program, that may be beyond their comfort zone, but they still the best person, like they're sort of like your consultant working with this other consultant to take care of you, to make sure that whoever's doing the phase one or phase two is doing what they're supposed to be doing and looking out for your interests.
Yeah, and we
Okay.
always double checked whatever our contractors were doing, and we're with them and pretty much every step of the way. I will explain that our tribe doesn't have like a reservation per se, so we have service deliver areas. This site was in Omaha. I live in Lincoln, so it's like an hour away. So I wasn't honestly familiar with the site, even though it is close to one of our office sites, until I went there the first time.
Yeah, and the outside contractors are usually happy to work with, you know, somebody with the tribe, because they want to do a good job. Hey, how about the stresses?
Stresses from my side was new staff, both in EPA and myself. It was the first time I've ever done it, and we had a brand new project officer who was brand new to brownfields. So that threw huge kinks into a lot of things. Started a project and then got pulled back and said, no, you can't do that, after we already did it, which caused some issues. And then we figured that out, moved forward. QUAPs took forever, a long time to get QUAPs written. We use
Tell us what a
KSU
QUAP
tabs,
is. A lot of people don't know what that is.
quality assurance project plan. So anytime you take any scientific data, like asbestos sampling or anything like that, you have to have an approved QUAP by EPA, especially if you're using EPA funding. So we worked with our contractor to write QUAPs. We had 2 of them, with 2 different contractors, one for sampling and one for the abatement itself, which both took a long time. They had never really written QUAPs before, and it took quite a while to get it approved by EPA, which leads to the next one, which is the time frame. It did delay the project quite a bit. I was very grateful for housing for being very flexible with me. It was kind of frustrating, I know, but it was
No,
kind of difficult.
I like the way like you sketched this out, Misha, that you're pointing out that, you know, you can't expect EPA to come in and take care of it for you. But if EPA knows that there's somebody local, like a tribal response program, who's running it, then that gives you an access to the EPA people, the EPA expertise, all their resources, that they have confidence that they're not just wasting their time, that they have somebody local who's gone through a process that you're saying, okay, you meet the standards, and you could, we'll help you do it, but together we'll get the job done. And it's really, it's so important, it's so helpful to have a local tribal response program.
Well, and we did utilize KSU tabs to read our co-ops and kind of review them as a second eye to kind of help us out, as it was my first one. Especially that first co-op, I had no idea exactly what I was looking at. Second one, I was a little better prepared, even though it was written horribly. But first one, they helped me out quite a bit.
Yeah, and that's what we do at TAB. We help the tribes out, but we just can't go in and do this stuff for you, but we could work with your local people. So let's talk about this asbestos project.
So the property is about 5 acres in Ralston/Omaha, Nebraska. I had 2 houses, one had 2 floors and the other one did not. So there was asbestos almost literally everywhere, in all the ceilings and all the floors. Even the kitchen sink had asbestos underneath it. So we had them remove all of that. In the kitchen, we even found another layer of possible asbestos, which then they then removed.
Yeah, when it was built, it was probably the builder was bragging about what a great job they did, that they put all this asbestos in, the miracle fiber that, really stands up well.
Yeah, it was, I mean, it stood up. It was still protecting our electrical boxes, even though someone had gone in and taken some of that parts out, but it was still standing. So then the smaller house also had it in its ceiling and its floors. So those were also removed.
Yeah, this is extensive work. All right, so tell us a little bit about what got you guys to work together, and are you, like how do you feel about, have you changed the way you do anything as a result of working together and seeing the benefits?
Alex, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I believe, we're short funded for this project. We know we don't have enough monies to complete it. So we were reaching out to see how they can help. And then also with the phase 1, phase 2, when Eugene came over and give us some technical assistance, then we start reaching out to them and see what they can do for us. And they got some funding that they could use to do the phase 1 abatement. So we were like, great, we're short funded, they got money, let's let them help us. But like Misha said, there was some delays. So because the environmental wasn't done, we couldn't draw the grant funds to do some payments to the architect or contractors, other contractors. But at the end of the day, it got delayed a little bit, but everything came out good. And now we're moving forward with getting these houses demolished. Now we're on the process of finalizing the permit with the city so we can demolish those 2 properties.
And now, did you do that work with the with Misha before you did the asbestos project, or after?
We've been working together a little bit on other aspects. We got multiple homes with radon systems. So they come in and do testing for us and do quality control, also air quality. So we've been working on other aspects together over the years.
Okay, and just to clarify what Alex was talking about, whenever a housing authority develops new housing, whether it's rehab or new construction, before you bring it into your inventory, you got to say, hey, is this a decent place for people to live? Is there anything wrong with it? Or you also have to say, um, what would be the impact on it? Is the site contaminated? And for the housing authority has to know enough to just like work with an expert. Like people who do housing are not experts on site contamination. But the question was, do they go and hire an outside consultant that, who knows where they live, and they're they do most of their work on non-tribal properties? Or is there some way we could get somebody to do this who's with the tribe? And if you have a tribal response program, yeah, that's a logical place to go. You don't have to go to them, but why wouldn't you want to? Okay, so any that you really said exactly what we want to do to frame this, but we're trying to say what's worked in the past, what you have. But I guess what I'd like to do is now open it up for anyone else who's in the audience. Can anyone give us an example of something that has worked in the past or something that hasn't worked in the past? Sometimes we learn more from our mistakes than we do when we get something right. So I see people I don't recognize in there. Sheila, 7-star. Are you prepared to tell us a little bit about your experiences? How about Tina Becker? Okay, anyone else? Could I get anyone to talk here? Holly?
Don't feel shy. Like I said earlier, these virtual trainings are for you to share things, so please share if you can.
How
I'd
about
like to say something. With the Ponca tribe and the Ponca Housing Authority, it was our first big project together, so we all learned, and it was a good experience. A lot of bumps in the road, but it's coming together, so I'm happy for that.
Okay, Tina tells us that and Sheila, both their microphone isn't working. How about, is there anyone that I missed? Did I ask Christina Froelich?
I just newly started with Ponca Tribe Housing about 2 months ago, so I'm learning a lot of different things. So I don't really have anything that I've tried and not worked yet.
Okay, and you're working with good people who've done this, so you could pick up on it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Scott, where do you think we should go from here? Like we'd really like
I was going to ask Adam if he had anything to say. Adam's with the Ho-Chunk tribe. They've or the Ho-Chunk Nation, excuse me. And I didn't know. I thought you guys had some housing stuff recently. Maybe if you have a mic there, you can share.
Hey, this is Adam. Can you hear me?
yes.
Yeah.
So it is a relatively new program. I think we're just almost a year in right now. And I haven't found an eligible brownfield yet to apply for any grants. Still in the inventory process and setting up some policies, procedures. So early stages.
Okay.
I wish I had something to share, some success or unsuccess.
That's usually good news if you don't have a brownfield, but I think after COVID, everybody's going to have more brownfields than they know what to do with.
Fingers crossed.
Okay, is there anyone who's in the audience, is there any questions or things that you want to ask us, or things that we should be looking at to, take this further?
You guys can quickly give a quick thumbs up if you're good to go and you have no questions as well, so that our presenters know if there are any questions.
And I'd like to encourage people that, I don't know the way you are, but me, it's hard for people to say, oh, ask a question, and then the next day I think of all the things that I should have asked or all the things I want to know. And, we're not here for a one shot. TAB is something where we're trying to provide this technical assistance for, forever type of thing. And if not KSU, it'll be someone else. And so I want you to think of, what type of questions or what type things you'd like to know about, questions you have, we'll consider that and what to do for the future. I'm going to put my email in the chat, and Scott's going to do that also. That Scott's the main contact, really. He's the director of the Tribal TAB program.
One thing I had mentioned earlier is that, Tribal TAB did a presentation just in the Region 5 area, with somebody from the HUD, Office of Native American Programs. And, it was just an hour and a half maybe. And it was a good chance to maybe, I think, for the tribes to hear about quite a few of the HUD programs. And then, of course, we were presenting the brownfields perspective. So with that, it explained some of the overlap. But, for folks not in Region 5, if you'd like to, try to instigate something like that, that was a special request to do that from the EPA region. But, if you folks would like us to have some sessions on topics like that, we definitely can. Or just part of our, we have regional brownfields trainings, and we could just, add that as a one little part of that for the bigger TRP training. However you want to get the information from us, we're here to share.
Yeah, and let me also point out, I think the people in the room know this, but if anyone actually does look at a recording, that TAB likes to go out and provide in-person technical assistance. Scott mentioned he's going to be on the road next month. And, that all you got to do is ask. It's free, and there's no competition to get the technical assistance. Like, I don't think TAB has ever turned any tribe away. All you got to do is ask. Okay, so we're not going to report out. There are resources out there we could help you get. This is just one thing where HUD's Office of Healthy Homes did something specifically for the tribes. And I know, I really know EPA and HUD better than other federal agencies, but I know both of those agencies, especially the last few years, have made a real effort to try and meet the needs of tribes. That the agencies recognize that things are a little different in Indian country, and you can't expect the same thing. But both HUD and EPA have had people who their job is to work with tribes, as opposed to somebody who has, maybe 10% of their workload is tribes. The people that you deal with, 100% of their workload is tribes. And with EPA, they've even hired Kansas State University to provide technical assistance to tribes when they needed free technical assistance. Okay, I think unless anybody has anything to say, I think it's survey time now, right, Crystal?
Yes, so if you can go ahead and complete that for us, it would help us improve these virtual trainings and, you know, and keep the ball rolling. Lets us know how we're doing and how we can improve. So please, 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 we'll go ahead and plug that in.
Okay, and really, send an email to me or Scott. You know, if you have any ideas or just needs, or, you know, it doesn't have to be fully formed. It could just be, well, I've been thinking about this. Do you know anything about it? Do you know anybody else who has a similar issue? You know, sometimes the best thing we could do is to hook one tribe up with another tribe that's already solved that problem. Okay, so fill out the evaluation that we could see where it's going. While you're here, we're gonna plug something next week that if this says that HUD has this online system for environmental review, and tribes are not going to be required to do it anytime soon. That's one part. The other part is that when I visited tribes, they're the most in need of help to do environmental reviews because they don't do them all the time. Like generally it's somebody that's their job to do maybe 40 hours a year. And, you know, and every time they have to do it, they have to relearn it. And you're afraid it's HUD gonna monitor you. And Heroes is great in that it prevents you from making really stupid mistakes. So at this session, I'm going to talk about Heroes. I'm going to also show you that there's a bunch of worksheets that you could download that, hey, I saw the questions that Hero asked. It doesn't do it online. I'm also going to show you that there's a practice environment where you could do your projects, practice in Heroes, and make sure you're not making any mistakes. But if you don't want to put it online, you don't have to. HUD is not going to make you do it. So if you do any environmental assessment work, if you haven't seen Heroes, you should spend an hour looking at this. If you've seen Heroes, but you've been a little frustrated, maybe this will be helpful too.
Thanks, Eugene. And then this session is going to actually be available on our YouTube channel. So that right there is our YouTube channel link. We're going to try and get it up as soon as possible. So if you want to, you know, let anyone know to go ahead and, you know, visit that, visit this session, whatnot, you can definitely find it on there. So we try and get them up within like 48 hours. YouTube's a little different, but like I said, we're pretty good with it. So just be patient. All right. And then
Could I interrupt? I don't think
yeah, go ahead.
I don't think I properly thanked the people who did show up here, and especially our presenters from the Ponca tribe and the Northern Ponca Housing Authority. That it's fun to do these things, and we're just trying to help people out.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, don't forget to check out our upcoming events as well on our social media sites, such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Snapchat. We also have a podcast, the Hovathinga podcast. So food for thought, Eugene, maybe you'll do an episode or two for us and we can talk about some things. So toss that version of, you know, our virtuals out there as well. So, and then I think that's it. So thank you everyone so much for attending today. We definitely appreciate you being here. Stay safe and healthy, and thank you.
Thank you.